Welcome back to the city. Tonight we trace the entire timeline of Leon Scott Kennedy, from the night he drove into Raccoon City, late to his very first shift, through every mission, every loss, and every impossible choice across more than 25 years of the Resident Evil universe. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what stories you want me to cover next. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy this kind of slow, immersive storytelling that unfolds like a dream. Before the city broke. Leon Scott Kennedy was born in 1977, and from early on, the direction of his life felt more like a current than a choice. His father was a law enforcement officer, a well-respected one by the accounts that have survived in the records, and that detail mattered more than it might seem. When a child grows up watching a parent move through the world with a badge and a purpose, the shape of what adulthood is supposed to look like takes on a particular outline. For Leon, that outline was a uniform. It was structure, duty, a clear line between what was right and what was not. He was the kind of young man who needed those lines, not because he was rigid, but because he believed in them deeply, in a way that only people who have not yet seen how easily those lines can dissolve tend to believe. The police academy shaped him in ways that even his instructors could not fully account for. He was not their easiest student. Reports from that period describe him as reckless and rash, someone whose instincts often ran ahead of his discipline. But those same reports acknowledge something harder to quantify, that he was highly qualified, more so than his rough edges suggested. There was intelligence operating beneath the impulsiveness. When he applied himself, the results were apparent. He passed the full course. He completed everything that was asked of him, and he did it adequately enough that his assessors signed off on his record with the confidence that he could do the job. But then something went wrong, and it almost undid everything. During training, a firearm Leon was handling discharged by accident. The shot injured his partner. It was the kind of incident that ends careers before they begin, the kind of mistake that follows a person's name in the permanent record of their profession. There were discussions about expulsion. The police academy did not tolerate careless handling of weapons. The entire structure of their training existed to prevent precisely that kind of moment. Leon's future in law enforcement appeared briefly to be over before it had properly started. His father intervened. This is a detail that sits quietly in the background of who Leon became, never directly addressed in the missions and crises that would define his later life, but present nonetheless. The elder Kennedy used whatever influence he had to prevent his son's dismissal, and the compromise that emerged from those conversations was a transfer rather than an expulsion. Leon had completed the coursework. He had demonstrated the necessary competencies. The disciplinary decision became not a closed door, but a redirected one. Instead of the large city posting he might otherwise have expected, Leon was sent to a smaller, quieter jurisdiction, a department in a town nestled in the Arklay Mountains of the Midwest. A dying company town, as it happened, whose fortunes were closely bound to the pharmaceutical corporation that had built much of it. The town's name was Raccoon City. At the time, Raccoon City was not quiet. It was struggling with a rising tide of crime, a wave of missing persons cases that had generated genuine public alarm, and a series of bizarre homicides that had shaken the surrounding counties throughout the summer of 1998. The murders were strange enough that they had attracted national media attention in fragments. The Raccoon City Police Department, under the command of Chief Brian Irons, had launched a recruitment drive to address the growing concern of residents. More officers were needed. The department needed to be seen as responding to the crisis, even if the nature of what it was actually responding to remained, at that point, deeply unclear. Leon had been following these reports from a distance. He found himself genuinely drawn to them. There was something about the scale of the mystery in that small mountain city, combined with the fact that it was the posting he had been given, that focused his attention. He visited the station before his official start date. He received a basic introduction to the department, met a few faces, and got a sense of the building he would be reporting to. The Raccoon City Police Department was housed in a former art museum, an ornate, unusual structure that had been converted years earlier, its original purpose still visible in the architecture and layout of the building's upper floors. Leon noted it, filed it away, and drove back to wherever he was staying that week, thinking about his first day. Then the night before that first day arrived, and his personal life came apart. The relationship had been strained for a while. The transfer to Raccoon City had complicated things in ways that a young couple navigating the ordinary pressures of new careers and uncertain futures could not easily absorb. Leon had been uprooted. He had no apartment arranged in the city yet, no real plan for how the logistics of his life in this new place were going to take shape. His girlfriend had reached the end of her patience with the uncertainty, and the argument that followed was the kind that does not resolve, the kind that ends things. They broke up that night. Whatever words passed between them, the outcome was that Leon was suddenly facing his first day as a police officer, not just late and unmoored, but alone in a way he had not been 24 hours earlier. He went to a party afterward. This is not a detail that reflects particularly well on his judgment, but it is the kind of detail that makes him recognizable as a person rather than a symbol. He drank too much. The grief and the stress of the argument had to go somewhere, and he directed it into the kind of evening that a 21-year-old far from home and recently heartbroken sometimes chooses. He ended up in a motel room, asleep in his clothes, with a pounding head and no alarm set. He slept through the morning. He woke in the afternoon of September 29, 1998, hungover and late. He pulled on his uniform as quickly as he could and got into his car. He had tried calling his supervising officer earlier, multiple times, and received no answer. This should have been the first signal that something was wrong. But Leon had a more immediate explanation available to him. He was late on his first day. His supervisor had no reason to be waiting by the phone for a rookie who had not yet reported in, and the silence on the other end of the line was probably irritation rather than absence. He kept driving. There is something quietly devastating about this detail when you consider it against everything that followed. The unanswered phone was the last piece of ordinary logic that Leon Kennedy ever applied to an unexplained silence. After September 29, 1998, he would never again reach a quiet radio and assume the most benign explanation. From that night forward, every absence was a potential horror. Every unanswered call was a city that had already gone. The innocence required to hear a dead line and assume inconvenience rather than catastrophe was gone before the sun finished setting on his first day. The highway into Raccoon City had been blocked at some point in the recent past by a United States Army checkpoint. By the time Leon passed through that stretch of road, the checkpoint had fallen. The barriers were there, but the soldiers were gone, scattered or transformed or dead. Leon drove through the checkpoint and continued south into the city. He noted the emptiness of the roads, the unusual quiet, the absence of the ordinary traffic and movement that a city of that size should have had in the late afternoon hours. He was processing this, still generating explanations, still assuming that whatever he was seeing had a rational cause that did not touch him directly. Then he saw the body. He stopped the car to investigate, as a police officer would. The figure he found was not moving in the way bodies are supposed to move when they are dead. The main road was eerily still, and Leon stepped out into that stillness with his hand near his weapon, reading the scene as best he could. Then the street was no longer still. They came from the surrounding structures, figures that moved with wrong rhythms, that did not respond to voice commands, that did not react the way human beings react when approached. Leon retreated into an alleyway, and it was there that he met the first other living person he would encounter in Raccoon City. Her name was Claire Redfield. She was 20 years old. She had ridden a motorcycle into the city looking for her older brother Chris, and she had been fleeing zombies in a diner before she ended up in that alleyway with a police officer she had never met. They did not have long to establish anything about themselves or each other. The situation pressed them together by necessity. They found an RPD cruiser, got in, and drove toward the police station with every reasonable expectation that the police station would be a refuge, that it would be staffed, that it would offer shelter and communication, and some kind of organized response to whatever this was. They did not know yet what this was. Unknown to either of them, the car they were in had carried something aboard. A stowaway zombie in the back seat made itself known on the drive, forcing the vehicle off the road and separating them before they reached the station doors. Leon told Claire he would meet her inside. He ran through the streets alone for the rest of that approach, toward a building that was not the refuge it appeared to be from the outside. The Raccoon City Police Department was a ruin of its former self by the time Leon pushed through its doors. The lights were on in some sections and dark in others. The carpets were stained. The sound of the building was wrong. Not the ordinary ambient noise of a functioning station, but something heavier and stranger. Leon moved through the entrance hall and began to understand, in stages, that no one was coming. The officers who had been here were gone or changed. The few he found that still resembled the people they had been were barely holding on. Officer Marvin Branner found Leon in the main lobby. Branner had been injured, badly, and was keeping himself upright through what read as pure determination. He gave Leon what context he could, that the city had been overrun, that something in the water had spread through the population, that Umbrella was involved. He told Leon to get out while he could. He gave him a key card to access deeper parts of the building and pointed him towards survival. Then he told him to go, and Leon went. Marvin Branner would not survive the night. He knew this. The wound he had was the kind that progressed in one direction when left untreated, and treatment was not available in the Raccoon City Police Department on September 29th, 1998. He had stayed anyway, stayed conscious, stayed useful, made sure that when someone came through the front door looking for answers, he would be there to provide what fragments he had. There is a version of the Raccoon City story in which Branner's decision to remain at his post rather than attempt to evacuate is heroism, and another version in which it is simply the absence of anywhere better to go. Both versions are probably true. Leon walked away from that lobby carrying a key card and the knowledge that the officer who had given it to him was going to become one of the things in the hallways before the morning came. What followed inside the Raccoon City Police Department was among the most formative sequences of Leon's entire life. The building was enormous and labyrinthine, its former identity as an art museum still visible in the ceilings and moldings and the way the rooms connected in ways that did not follow conventional police station logic. There were puzzles built into it, doors sealed by mechanisms that required keys and emblems and components spread throughout the complex. There were things in the halls that had been people. Leon moved through all of it. He found a journalist named Ben Bertolucci locked in one of the holding cells in the basement. Bertolucci had been digging into Umbrella's operations in Raccoon City, had uncovered a conspiracy between the corporation and the local police, and had gotten himself arrested for his trouble, though whether Chief Irons had arrested him on genuine charges or simply to contain what he knew was a question that answered itself in the nature of the answer. Bertolucci was desperate. He pleaded with Leon to let him out of the cell, aware that the person sharing his cell was in the final stages of infection and turning. The journalist had uncovered something real, had risked himself to expose it, and had ended up locked in a cell in a dying building with an infected cellmate for his trouble. Leon took in what Bertolucci offered, filed it into the growing picture forming in his mind, and continued moving through the building. He found items, weapons, ammunition. He found the bodies of officers he could not help. He found photographs on walls and plaques in hallways describing the building's transition from art gallery to police station. Details that seemed absurd to be reading under the circumstances, but which formed a strange kind of texture to the night, a reminder that Raccoon City had been a real and functioning place before all of this. He navigated the building's 2 floors, its basement levels, its underground passages, trying to find a path forward, while managing the reality that the building itself was essentially an enormous closed system full of things that wanted to kill him. And then he found Ada Wong, the night below the station. She introduced herself in the basement of the Raccoon City Police Department. The circumstances were not ideal for trust. Leon was armed, wary, and had by that point encountered enough of the building's horrors to be running on something close to controlled adrenaline. Ada was composed in a way that was immediately notable, the kind of composure that does not come from being unafraid, but from being practiced at concealing fear. She told him her name. She told him she had been searching the city for her missing boyfriend, a man named John Clemens, and that she believed the answers to what had happened to him were connected to the pharmaceutical company Umbrella. John Clemens, as it would turn out, was a researcher who had died in the Spencer Mansion incident months earlier, an event that had consumed the original Stars Alpha and Bravo teams in the Arklay Mountains. Ada did not know this at the time she gave Leon her cover story, which gives her fabrication a layer of irony. The lie she told was based on a real person whose fate she did not yet know. What Leon understood in that basement was the surface presentation. A young woman, searching for someone she cared about, surviving in a place that was killing everyone around her. He believed her, more than believed her. He felt compelled by some combination of instinct and principle to protect her. This would become a recurring pattern in their relationship, across everything that followed. Leon Kennedy, in the middle of a disaster that was consuming thousands of people, made the safety of this one woman a personal priority. He took a bullet for her. At a moment when Umbrella's scientist Annette Birkin confronted them and opened fire, Leon stepped into the path of the shot, rather than let it reach Ada. The wound was not fatal, but it was real, and it slowed him. He continued anyway. The act of taking a bullet for someone is one of those things that sounds straightforward in a tactical summary and is considerably less straightforward in the actual moment. It requires either a calculation made faster than conscious thought, or the absence of calculation entirely, the body moving because it has already decided before the mind has assembled the instructions. For Leon, with Ada, It was the latter. Whatever she had said to him, whatever of herself she had permitted to show through the operational surface she maintained, had done something to his instincts that overrode the self-preservation that the police academy and his training had spent years trying to make automatic. He stepped in front of a bullet for a woman he had met hours ago in the basement of a dying building. When he was honest with himself about it later, which he rarely was in explicit terms, it was not purely protective instinct. It was something he did not have a clean name for. Annette Birkin was the wife of William Birkin, the umbrella researcher who had injected himself with the G virus he had spent decades developing after a team of Umbrella's operatives attempted to steal it from him and leave him for dead in his own laboratory. The injection had not killed him. It had transformed him into something that barely retained his human shape between mutations, a creature that regenerated, that absorbed, that grew more dangerous and more monstrous with each encounter. William Birkin had become G, and he was moving through the tunnels and passages beneath Raccoon City, with a fixation on his daughter Sherry, the G virus seeking to propagate itself through the closest available genetic material. It was Annette who told Leon the truth about Ada. She was not a grieving girlfriend searching for a lost partner. She was a spy, operating on behalf of one of Umbrella's corporate rivals, sent to Raccoon City to acquire a sample of the G virus. Leon confronted Ada with this. She did not deny it outright. By the time the confrontation arrived, something between them had shifted enough that the conversation did not go the way it might have gone earlier in the night. Ada acknowledged what she was, acknowledged the mission, and also acknowledged something more ambiguous, that whatever she had felt during their hours together in that dying city was not entirely manufactured. Whether Leon believed that, or whether his belief mattered less than his inability to simply stop caring about her welfare, is one of those questions that the series has asked quietly for decades without resolving cleanly. The community has long read these moments as genuine, a crack in Ada's operational mask that she could not fully close. But the series is careful never to confirm what is behind it. In the sewers beneath Raccoon City, they found transport to Nest, Umbrella's primary laboratory in the region, buried far beneath the city, dedicated specifically to G virus research. Ada's leg had been badly injured during their passage through the station. She was not able to move efficiently, and Leon effectively carried much of the operational weight as they navigated the lab environment. Nest was a facility of considerable scale, clinical and white, and built to the exact specifications of the kind of institution that only exists because the people running it believe they will never be called to account. The G virus was real here. The research was real. The horror of what Umbrella had actually been doing beneath the city of Raccoon City was legible in every corridor. Annette appeared again inside Nest, attempting to prevent Ada from completing her mission. In the confrontation that followed, Ada was wounded and fell from a catwalk into the darkness below, struck either by Annette's gunfire or, based on the events as retold later, by one of William Birkin's mutated forms catching her during the chaos of that desperate sequence underground. The precise details of that fall have never been fully clear, and in a facility that was already destroying itself around them, certainty was not a luxury anyone had. Leon watched her fall. He believed she was dead. He did not stop moving. Survival required forward momentum, always. But the weight of that moment registered somewhere that would take years to fully process. He had met a woman that night who had lied to him, used him, and also, by every indication, saved his life at critical moments, and possibly felt something real in the margins of her operational purpose. And now she appeared to be gone. Leon regrouped with Claire Redfield in Nest's lower levels. Claire had been conducting her own traversal of the city and the underground facility, and she had found Sherry Birkin, the little girl at the center of everything, William Birkin's daughter, who had been infected with a G virus embryo. The child was alive but deteriorating. Claire had found a vaccine called Devil that could halt the progression of the infection, and she had administered it. The three of them, a rookie cop with a bullet wound, a 20-year-old college student, and a sick 12-year-old child, were together now in the deepest part of a self-destructing laboratory. They found a train. The underground facility had one, designed for emergency use. They boarded it as the countdown on Nest's destruction sequence ran towards zero. William Birkin found them one final time on that train, in his most advanced form yet, barely recognizable as anything that had once been human. And Leon and Claire fought him in the confined space of the moving train car until the creature finally, definitively, did not get up again. The train emerged from the tunnels and the three of them climbed out into the pre-dawn air above Raccoon City. But Ada survived. She had not died in the fall. The exact sequence of how she pulled herself out of that shaft and out of Nest has never been fully accounted for in the record. The most reasonable interpretation is that she was more mobile than the fall appeared to leave her, and that the chaos of a self-destructing laboratory created enough cover for someone of her abilities to find an exit. Whatever combination of resilience and operational skill had kept her moving, she had retrieved the G virus sample she had come for, and she had escaped in the chaos of Nest's destruction, leaving behind a single act of generosity that Leon would carry with him into every subsequent encounter with her, as the T-103 Tyrant, the massive creature that had been pursuing Leon throughout the police station and into Nest, made one final assault on him outside the underground facility. A voice came from somewhere nearby, and a rocket launcher landed at Leon's feet. Ada had not simply survived. She had stayed long enough, or returned close enough, to give him the means to finish it. He used the launcher. The tyrant fell. It was not the last time Leon Kennedy would stand on a battlefield, with the echoes of a favor from Ada Wong still warm in his hands. But it was the first. The city above them was still dying. The sky over Raccoon City was the color of a wound as dawn tried to arrive. Leon, Claire, and Sherry walked away from the facility entrance as the military forces that had been quarantining the city closed in around the perimeter. The experiment was over. The cover-up was beginning. And somewhere in the grey morning light, a woman in red who had been a lie, and possibly something more, was making her way out through channels that Leon did not yet know existed. Raccoon City would be destroyed within hours. A United States military airstrike would reduce the infected urban area to rubble and glass. The official justification filed away in classified documents that almost no one would ever read. The bombing was, in one interpretation, a mercy delivered to a city that was already gone. In another interpretation, it was the final act of institutional self-protection by the same government and corporation that had allowed this to happen in the first place. Leon had survived one night in the worst city in America, and he had come out of it carrying knowledge that certain powerful people in Washington and in Umbrella's boardrooms would very much have preferred he not carry. He did not have long to consider what to do with it, what they made him into. The man who met Leon Kennedy after he walked out of Raccoon City was named Adam Benford. At that time, Benford held a position in military intelligence. The precise details of his role in the government's apparatus were classified in the way that such things usually are, visible only at certain levels of clearance. but his authority was real, and his purpose in approaching Leon was deliberate. Leon had done something extraordinary inside Raccoon City. He had survived. He had navigated a viral outbreak in a major urban center with limited weapons and no reinforcements. He had gathered information, formed partnerships, and reached the other side of a catastrophic event with both his life and a 12-year-old child in tow. These were not the accomplishments of a lucky civilian. These were the results of someone who could be useful. Benford made Leon an offer. It was framed as an offer, but based on what we know of the arrangement, it was closer in practice to a conscription with terms. Leon had emerged from Raccoon City carrying information that implicated the United States government in Umbrella's operations. He had also been present at the recovery of Sherry Birkin, a child who had survived G-virus infection, a detail of enormous scientific and strategic significance to various interests that were already circling. Leon could be brought in, turned into an asset, given training and resources, and a legitimate purpose in the fight against the bioterror threat that Raccoon City had demonstrated was real. Or the situation could be managed in other ways. Leon understood the shape of the choice well enough. He was 21 years old, and he had just watched a city die. He agreed. He had one condition: that Sherry Birkin would be kept safe, that her care would be secured as part of whatever arrangements they were entering into. Benford agreed to this. Sherry was placed under government supervision, eventually into the care of people connected to Benford's operation. She would grow up watched and studied and in many ways constrained by the nature of what had happened to her, but she would grow up. Leon accepted the terms. The transition from failed first-day rookie officer to government operative was not instantaneous. It took years. The Anti-Umbrella Pursuit and Investigation Team, the classified unit within United States Strategic Command that Leon was brought into, was a serious organization built for a serious purpose. Training was extensive and demanding. He spent months on firearms, on hand-to-hand combat, on close-quarters tactics that differed from what the police academy had taught him in the same way that a scalpel differs from a baton. Krauser, before he disappeared from Leon's life, had a hand in shaping the close-quarters combat training that would define Leon's operational style. The knife work especially, which would become central to how Leon fought in the field in ways that a standard RPD officer's training never would have produced. He learned to move through hostile environments with efficiency that did not announce itself. He built the physiological and psychological infrastructure of someone who could be placed into situations that would destroy most people and still make sound judgments under pressure. Leon rarely spoke about Raccoon City during this period, a silence that was partly policy and partly something more personal. The one person he opened up to with any consistency was Benford himself, who shared Leon's conviction that bioterrorism represented a genuine civilizational threat and needed to be met with something more than official denial. That shared conviction bound them to each other in a way that went beyond the professional. They became friends, or as close to friends as the structure of their relationship permitted. Somewhere in those training years, Leon appears to have pieced together that Ada Wong had survived Raccoon City. The games never show the exact moment of this realization, and it may have come through intelligence reports rather than any direct contact. The kind of inference that builds slowly from fragments rather than arriving in a single revelation. However it reached him, the correction of that assumption did not resolve anything. He still did not know who she worked for, what had happened to the G-virus sample she had retrieved, or what she was doing with her survival. He simply came to understand she was alive. He held that knowledge somewhere quiet and continued with his training. The world outside the classified programs was changing. Umbrella Corporation, the entity responsible for Raccoon City, was facing the consequences of what it had done. The corporation's internal structure was fracturing under the weight of investigations, defections, and the loss of credibility that came with having destroyed a major American city with biological weapons. By 2003, Umbrella would be finished as a functioning entity. Its dissolution did not mean the threat it had embodied was over. The knowledge, the viruses, the researchers, and the technology had all dispersed into the world, available to anyone with the resources and ruthlessness to acquire them. The problem Leon's unit existed to address had not been solved. It had been scattered. His first major field deployment came in 2002. His partner for the operation was a man named Jack Krauser. South American Jungle, 2002. Jack Krauser was not the kind of man who became easy to read quickly. He had a record in the United States Special Operations Command that described someone exceptionally effective, brave in the way that the military distinguishes as something more structured than recklessness, decorated for conduct in situations that the official records often understated. Krauser had been through things that left marks, and those marks were not invisible to anyone paying attention. He carried his past in the particular stillness of someone who has normalized extreme violence enough that ordinary tension no longer registers on his surface. This was Leon's first assignment with a seasoned partner. The operation was designated Operation Javier. It had been months in the planning, a careful assembly of intelligence around a single target. Javier Hidalgo, a South American drug lord who had spent years operating with the kind of impunity that comes from running an infrastructure of violence so complete that challenging it requires resources most governments are reluctant to commit. What changed the calculation was a contact. Umbrella, in its final unraveling, had lost control of its people. A former Umbrella researcher had made contact with Hidalgo. The researcher was believed to be selling biological agents, viruses, bioorganic weapon data, material that in the right or wrong hands represented a threat beyond anything a drug cartel traditionally posed. Leon and Krauser were sent to a remote stretch of South America to capture the researcher alive, disrupt whatever transaction was underway, and assess the scale of Hidalgo's biological capabilities. The mission's briefing was clean and purposeful in the way that field briefings always sound before contact is made with reality. They arrived in a region that had been quiet until it wasn't. The first village they passed through on the way to meet their guide was already lost. The viral outbreak had moved through it with the efficiency that T-virus strains tend to demonstrate in contained populations. Fast, thorough, leaving behind a town of the dead that walked and threatened and had to be fought through rather than around. Leon narrated the experience later with a kind of grim clarity. Krauser had believed, coming into this assignment, that bioorganic weapons were a theoretical threat in the same category as various other exotic dangers he had been briefed on across his career. The village ended that particular misconception very quickly. They moved through the jungle toward Hidalgo's territory. The drug lord was not simply a criminal entrepreneur who had purchased some dangerous toys. He was a man defined by obsession, specifically an obsession with his daughter, Manuela. Manuela Hidalgo had been sick since childhood with a terminal illness, and her father, who possessed the kind of wealth that makes conventional medicine insufficient and unconventional medicine available, had spent 15 years trying to prevent her death through means that pressed far beyond what any ethical framework could support. The means as Leon and Krauser discovered as they penetrated deeper into Hidalgo's compound, involved a regular series of organ transplants. Young women, more than 50 of them over 15 years, taken from the surrounding region, had been kidnapped, their organs harvested, and transplanted into Manuela to prevent her illness from progressing. The procedure had been augmented by the T. veronica virus, a strain that predated the T virus, and that had been developed from the research of Alexia Ashford at Umbrella's Antarctic facility. The virus in Manuela's blood was the reason the transplants were necessary, and also the reason they had been working. Her blood had become, as a consequence of prolonged exposure, something unprecedented. It was flammable. She could produce fire from her own body when the infection was active. Manuela herself had not chosen any of this. She was a teenager who had grown up inside her father's protective obsession without fully understanding what that protection had cost the people around her. When Leon and Krauser found her, she chose them. Or rather, she chose the possibility of a different life that their presence represented. She guided them through the compound. She helped them navigate the dangers that Hidalgo had constructed around himself. Those dangers included Hilda. Manuela's mother had been subjected to the T. veronica virus years earlier, and the transformation had been total. What had once been a woman was now something enormous and aquatic and defined by hunger, a creature that, based on what the mission uncovered, Javier either introduced to the virus deliberately in some misguided attempt at preservation, or allowed to spiral into her current state from an inability to face what his own actions had created. The game never provides a clean answer to which of these is true, and in some ways the ambiguity is worse than either option. Hilda attacked Leon and Krauser in the compound. The fight was ferocious. Krauser took a blow during the engagement that struck his left arm with enough force to damage it severely. He was not incapacitated, not immediately, not during the mission. But the injury was real, and it would not heal in the way that injuries from conventional sources heal. Javier Hidalgo's final form was his most desperate. He merged with a bioorganic weapon, a procedure that the T. veronica virus made possible in a monstrous way, transforming himself into a creature called the V complex, something vast and absorptive, capable of consuming everything around it. His stated capacity for destruction was not theoretical. The creature that Javier became could have contaminated 60% of the Amazon basin within 2 days. Leon and Krauser faced it together, and they faced it with the help of Manuela, who used the flammable properties of her own T. veronica altered blood as a weapon, burning the V complex from the outside, even as her father's love for her showed through the horror of what he had become. Javier asked Leon to kill him. His daughter was at risk of being absorbed into the creature's body. His love for her remained intact even inside the ruin of his form, and he understood what that form now represented. Leon obliged him. The V complex came apart. Javier died in fire, and the three of them, Leon, Krauser, and Manuela, escaped the compound by helicopter. Manuela was taken into government custody. She remained a complicated case. She had been kept alive by technology that had required decades of atrocity. Her blood carried a virus that made her medically extraordinary, and her future was going to be supervised rather than free. Leon told her before they parted that she had to keep living, not for herself, but for the sake of all the girls whose deaths had purchased her survival. It was the kind of thing, Leon says, the moral weight made explicit, offered as purpose, because purpose is the only thing that replaces the weight of enormous guilt with something that can be carried. Krauser's arm did not recover. The damage from Hilda's blow was permanent in ways that became clear in the weeks after the mission. His military career was effectively finished. A man whose entire identity had been built around physical capability and elite service was looking at medical discharge and the end of everything that had defined him. He processed this with the particular bitterness of someone who believed the system he had served owed him something and was now simply discarding him. Operation Javier was covered up. Leon's involvement was erased from official documentation. The government that had sent them into that jungle had no interest in acknowledging what had happened there. Krauser disappeared from Leon's life after that. He was told the man had died in a helicopter crash. He believed this for 2 years, and it was true in the sense that the Jack Krauser who had existed before Javier's compound had, in every meaningful way, ceased to exist. What replaced him was already in the process of becoming something else entirely. Spain, 2004, 6 years after Raccoon City. Leon Kennedy arrived in a remote mountain village in Spain as a federal agent working directly for the office of the President of the United States. The distance between his arrival as a hungover rookie, driving into a dying city, and his arrival as the sole operative dispatched to recover the president's kidnapped daughter was measured not just in time, but in transformation. He was leaner than the young man in the police uniform. His instincts had been sharpened by years of operations that had demanded outcomes rather than intentions. The dry wit that had always been part of his character had calcified into a kind of deadpan that deflected the full weight of the situations he was perpetually walking into. Ashley Graham was the daughter of President Graham. She had been abducted on her way home, a kidnapping that the intelligence services had classified as an inside job almost from the moment it was reported, given the precision with which her security had been bypassed. She had been tracked to this region of Spain, to a village in a mountainous area designated Valdelobos, and Leon had been sent alone. In the remake continuity, partly because every government agent with a security clearance was being investigated for a potential mole connected to the kidnapping, making him among the few who could be dispatched without suspicion. He could be trusted. He was the option. He arrived with 2 local officers from the Spanish National Police, neither of whom would survive the first hours of the operation. The village they entered appeared, at first, simply rural. Smoke from chimneys, fields being worked, a dog hanging from a barn structure that was the first clear signal that something was badly wrong. Then a man with an axe who lunged at Leon with the look of someone who had surrendered every individual purpose they had ever had. The officer who had wandered into the forest to investigate a sound did not come back. Leon went to look, found the officer's body, and the village came alive in the way that the bad kind of village comes alive. All at once, collectively, with a shared purpose that no individual among them had chosen for themselves. The local population of this region had been infected with Las Plagas. They were not zombies in the biological sense that Raccoon City's T-virus created. They were called ganados, controlled people, their rational minds overwritten by a parasitic organism that had been cultivated and deployed by the cult known as Los Iluminados. The leader of Los Iluminados was a man named Osmond Sadler, who had discovered the ancient parasites in the region's caves and spent years developing them into a tool for exactly this kind of total behavioral control. His ambition was geopolitical. Infect Ashley Graham, return her to her father, and eventually, through the growing plaga within her, bring the President of the United States under the cult's mental control. The plan was sophisticated and patient in a way that casual evil rarely is. Leon survived the village. He survived it through a combination of tactical positioning, the extraordinary luck that had been following him since September 1998, and the sudden ringing of a church bell that drew every infected villager's attention away from the burning barn they had been trying to torch him in. He would learn later that Ada Wong had rung that bell. The woman he had watched fall into darkness in Umbrella's underground lab 6 years earlier was here in rural Spain, operating on another mission that she had not shared with him, connected to players he did not yet fully understand. She departed without waiting for gratitude, and Leon filed her survival away as confirmation of everything he had suspected since learning she was alive. He moved north. He met a man named Luis Serra, a former Los Iluminados researcher who had decided that whatever he had been party to in his work for the cult was something he wanted to distance himself from. Luis was charming in the way that people are charming when they are trying to obscure something complicated about themselves, and his help was genuine even when his full honesty was not. Luis had worked as a researcher for the cult, had been involved in the development and study of the Plaga's parasite, and had at some point reached the limit of what he could participate in without becoming something he did not want to be. He had scars on his chest from an implantation procedure. The parasite had been placed in him directly, its effects experienced firsthand, and he had survived it removed. He carried that experience alongside his guilt for the research he had contributed, and he was trying, in his limited way, to correct the ledger. They were captured together by Granados shortly after meeting. During the capture, both were sedated, and when Leon woke, he discovered that a Las Plagas egg had been implanted in his body. He was now infected with the same parasite that was controlling the villagers around him. The Plaga was growing. The timeline for it reaching maturity and asserting control over its host was not indefinite. Leon had days, not weeks, before the organism inside him would either kill him or override him entirely. Luis gave him medication, suppressants to slow the parasite's development, and told him that the infection could be reversed through a surgical procedure, that it was not yet too late. This information was enormously important and entirely dependent on Luis's ability to deliver what he was promising. Leon found Ashley locked inside the church at the top of the village. She had been infected with her own plaga by the time he reached her. 2 infected people, neither of them controlled yet, trying to find their way out of a village that was completely hostile to their survival. Ramon Salazar, the young castellan of a vast castle that dominated the region from its elevated position in the mountains, was Sadler's subordinate and the next major obstacle. Salazar was a young man who had inherited both the castle and a family legacy of Los Iluminados devotion, and who compensated for an obvious absence of physical menace with an excess of theatrical cruelty. His castle was full of traps, ganados in various configurations, and the particular atmosphere of a place that has been given over entirely to a single fanaticism. Leon moved through it, as he moved through everything, methodically, with commentary that served as pressure release, looking for Ashley, and then protecting her when he found her. Luis died in the castle. Sadler killed him personally, taking from him a sample of the master plaga, the dominant strain that was necessary for the surgical removal procedure Luis had been trying to deliver. Leon held Luis as he died. Luis had been helping them, genuinely, and his death was Sadler's demonstration that the cult was aware of the threat Leon represented. Before Luis died, he gave Leon a key to his personal lab, the means to access a cure that Luis had been developing separately. Ada moved through the castle on her own trajectory. She surfaced near Leon with enough frequency to indicate she was watching his progress, and on more than one occasion, her intervention prevented him from being killed. She did not explain herself. She gave him information: Ashley's location when it changed, a boat key when he needed to reach the island where Ashley had been taken, and then withdrew into whatever operational space she occupied. Leon asked her directly if she was working for Wesker. She neither confirmed nor denied it cleanly. Their conversations in the shadow of the castle, on the water between the mainland and the island, circled around a wound that Raccoon City had opened, and that neither of them had the full vocabulary to describe. Krauser was on the island. The man Leon had been told died in a helicopter crash 2 years ago was very much alive, standing in the compound with the composure of someone who had spent those 2 years building himself into something new. He had joined Albert Wesker. He had used the Las Plagas infection deliberately, not as a victim of the cult's manipulation, but as a choice, injecting himself with a plaga that enhanced his physical capabilities and altered his left arm into something biological and monstrous and immensely powerful. He had kidnapped Ashley himself, delivering her to Sadler in exchange for access to the parasite's power. The bonus chapters from the Dark Side Chronicles tell the story from Krauser's perspective, and what they suggest is that he had done all of this because Operation Javier had broken something in him that the government's indifference had finished, because he saw in Wesker not a villain to oppose, but a man who had found power outside the systems that had discarded him. He told Leon, in the ruins where they fought, that Leon was still a kid, holding on to fantasies about right and wrong, that the world did not work the way Leon believed it worked, that everything Leon had given himself to was a lie maintained by people who would sacrifice him the moment his usefulness expired, exactly the way they had sacrificed Krauser after his arm was destroyed in the jungle. There was truth threaded through Krauser's bitterness, enough to sting. The government had covered up Operation Javier. It had discarded Krauser. It had lied to Leon about his partner's fate. None of this was false. Krauser had also mutated his own left arm using a plaga injection. The arm that the fight with Hilda had broken in the Amazon jungle was now something biological and armored and monstrous, capable of generating a blade from its transformed tissue and striking with force that outpaced anything a human arm should be capable of. He had done this deliberately. The thing he had argued against, the use of biological agents to grant power, he had adopted as his own method when the alternative was simply remaining the discarded, broken former soldier that the government had decided he was. The hypocrisy is not lost when you look at Krauser fully. He understood what the plagas did to people. He had watched it in the Amazon. He had chosen it for himself because the alternative was impotence. Leon killed him anyway, not because Krauser's arguments were wrong about the institutions, but because the path Krauser had chosen in response to those truths had led him to the kidnapping of a young woman and the willingness to work for people like Sadler and Wesker. The bitterness was earned. The choices made from that bitterness were not. Leon had made a different choice with the same knowledge of how the machinery worked, and he had not convinced himself that the machinery's failures justified becoming what Krauser had become. He had chosen, instead, to remain operational within a compromised system because the alternative, walking away or turning his capability against the thing he had served, produced worse outcomes for the people the system was supposed to protect. This was not a clean moral position. It was the position that the evidence of his experience had produced. He held it without pretending. It was simple. Sadler's death was operatic, and Leon approached it with a rocket launcher and Ada's assistance. The cult leader had made the mistake of explaining his philosophy at length, which is what cult leaders do when they believe they have already won. He had not won. Ada materialized with the rocket launcher special at the moment it was needed, and Sadler's transformations and speeches came to an end in an explosion that scattered the remnants of Los Illuminados' leadership across the compound. Leon pointed the rocket launcher at Ada afterward. He wanted answers. She told him that she would pay him back someday, and took the plaga sample at gunpoint, moving backward toward the helicopter that was waiting for her. He let her go. He has been asked, in the years since, in various ways and by various people, why he did not simply shoot her. The answers he gives tend to be insufficient, because the real answer involves something that he has never been fully willing to articulate. That whatever Ada Wong is to him occupies a space that his training and his judgment and his sense of operational clarity do not govern. She left him a jet ski. He and Ashley rode it out of the exploding island compound as the sun finished rising over the Atlantic. Two people who had both spent several days infected with mind-controlling parasites and who were now, improbably, alive. Ashley made an offer on the jet ski that Leon politely declined. He had already asked Ingrid Hunnigan, his communication contact who had been a steady voice in his ear throughout the mission, for her phone number. She told him he was still on duty. He accepted this with the grace of a man who has learned to take rejection from women in stride, which at this point in his life he had had considerable practice doing. The Las Plagas incident ended. Leon filed his mission report. He was already thinking about what came next. Harvardville, November 2005. The call came 1 year after Spain. Leon had barely had time to decompress from the Illuminados' mission before the machinery of his obligations found him again. That was the rhythm of his life now. Not a career that allowed for periods of genuine rest, but a series of emergencies separated by stretches of preparation for the next emergency. Raccoon City had made him permanently available in a way that ordinary working lives are not. He was too good at this, had survived too much, knew too much to be placed in a position of civilian remove from the ongoing threat. The incident occurred in November of 2005 in an American city called Harvardville, located approximately 100 miles from the site of what had once been Raccoon City. Harvardville carried a kind of proximity to that event that its residents were perhaps only vaguely aware of. The pharmaceutical corporation Will Pharma had significant operations in the region, and the National Medicine Conference had drawn a collection of industry figures, government officials, and researchers to the city. Among them was Senator Ron Davis, whose political relationship with Will Pharma had become a matter of public controversy. Also, among the arrivals that day, on a different flight, was a TerraSave worker named Claire Redfield. TerraSave was a small non-governmental organization that had emerged in the space between corporate accountability advocacy and direct humanitarian response to bioterrorism incidents. Claire had joined it in the years after Raccoon City. She had grown up, as Leon had grown up, in the shadow of that night, and she had chosen to orient her life around preventing its recurrence through channels that did not require a security clearance. TerraSave picketed the conference. Claire was at the airport when the outbreak began. A passenger aboard an arriving aircraft had been in the final stages of T-virus infection. The spread was rapid. Airports are architecturally designed to concentrate and move large numbers of people through confined spaces, which makes them among the most efficient environments for pathogen transmission imaginable. Within a short time, Harvardville Airport had become a closed system full of zombies, with a group of survivors sheltering in the VIP lounge while the terminal around them deteriorated. Claire was among the survivors. Senator Davis was among them too, his presence adding a layer of political complexity to an already dangerous situation. Leon arrived at the scene, leading a task force of specialists. He was the government's point person, the agent with the most direct operational experience with T-virus outbreaks outside of classified programs. He was joined on the rescue team by 2 local special response team officers, Angela Miller and Greg Glenn. He gave them clear instructions about how to engage with infected individuals, instructions they largely ignored in the field, in the way that people who have not yet genuinely encountered zombies tend to ignore instructions given by someone who sounds like they are using the word literally. Both officers were nearly killed before Leon demonstrated, with the calm efficiency that came from having done this before, what it actually took to stop an infected person from continuing to advance. Greg eventually became a casualty of the terminal. Angela survived. Claire's group was extracted. The airport was quarantined by the time the full scale of the outbreak became clear, and the Army Rangers began their systematic containment of the terminal as Will Farmer arrived with trucks carrying their experimental T-virus vaccine. Those trucks were destroyed. Explosives, placed by an unknown party, reduced the vaccine shipment to wreckage and advanced the political theatre of the moment considerably. Leon uncovered, in the ensuing hours, that a man named Curtis Miller, a former TerraSave activist whose family had been killed in Raccoon City and who had spent years trying to force the government to publicly acknowledge its complicity in that event, had obtained T-virus samples and staged the airport attack as a way of forcing the disclosure he had been unable to achieve through legitimate channels. Curtis was Angela Miller's brother. This detail added a particular anguish to the night that the professional framing of a government operation could not fully contain. Angela was investigating her own brother. Her brother had created the outbreak that had killed Greg, a man she had presumably worked alongside for years. The personal and the catastrophic were, as they always are in the incidents Leon was dispatched to address, inseparable. Curtis injected himself with the G-virus at Will Farmer's research facility. His transformation followed the pattern established by William Birkin. The G-virus did not simply kill, it consumed and rebuilt, producing something that retained the physiological substance of the person who had entered it, while discarding their individuality entirely. Curtis became a G mutant in Will Farmer's underground laboratory, pursued Leon and Angela through the facility as it burned and fell apart around them, and was eventually stopped when he grabbed Angela, and Leon put a shot through him at close range, sending him into the abyss below the broken catwalk. The real architect of the night was not Curtis. It was a Will Farmer researcher named Frederick Downing, who had been a former Umbrella employee and who had spent his career since the corporation's dissolution positioning himself for exactly this kind of moment. Downing had manipulated Curtis, had orchestrated the airport attack to create demand for the T-virus vaccine he was planning to sell to interested parties, and had arranged the destruction of his own company's vaccine shipment to prevent interference with his market. He had been planning to sell the T-virus and its vaccine as a package, create the crisis, supply the solution, profit from both ends. Leon identified Downing. He and Claire confronted him together in the aftermath of the facility's destruction, and Leon recognized the pattern beneath the noise of the night. Davis, whom Claire had initially accused of orchestrating everything for corporate enrichment, was innocent of the larger crime, and the evidence of that innocence pointed directly at the man who had been standing next to them, presenting himself as the helpful pharmaceutical researcher throughout the entire crisis. Downing was arrested by the local police and confessed. He provided intelligence that would prove useful in tracking the spread of Umbrella's legacy through the black market. The film that closed on the ruins of the Wilpharma facility showed Tricell employees in hazmat suits collecting biological material from the wreckage, including a limb of Curtis Miller's G-infected body. Tricell was a pharmaceutical corporation that had begun acquiring Umbrella's remnants, and what they wanted with the remains of the G virus was not difficult to imagine. Leon and Claire said their goodbyes to Angela. The reunion with Claire had been brief and defined almost entirely by crisis, but it was a reunion nonetheless. Whatever bond had formed between two people on the worst night in Raccoon City's history had not dissolved in the years since. They moved in different worlds now. Leon in the classified shadow of government operations, Claire in the visible work of advocacy and relief. But the thread between them held. He drove away from Harvardville carrying the knowledge, filed alongside everything else he carried, that Umbrella's technology was still in circulation. It had not died with the corporation. It had become available. The White House and what came before it, 2006. The year that followed the Harvardville incident brought Leon further into the confidence of President Graham's administration. This was, in one sense, simply the natural progression of a career in which extraordinary results produced extraordinary access. Leon had recovered the president's daughter. He had managed the Harvardville situation without it escalating into another Raccoon City. He was trusted in ways that most people at his level of service were not trusted, given direct access to the executive branch that reflected both his usefulness and the ongoing threat environment that justified keeping him close to power. In 2006, the White House experienced a cyber attack. Sensitive government files were accessed by unknown parties. Files that contained classified information about bioterrorism, research programs, information that the United States government had every reason to prevent from becoming public. 4 federal agents were summoned to investigate the breach. Leon was one of them. Another was a man named Jason. Jason carried a title within certain circles, the hero of Panamstan. This designation referred to an operation that had taken place 6 years earlier in a fictional country bordering China, where a civil war had drawn American military intervention. Jason had been the captain of a special forces unit called the Mad Dogs during that intervention. His unit had gone rogue from their orders to stand down when a helicopter from another American unit was shot down, mounting an unauthorized rescue operation into the crash zone. What they found there was an American unit that had already been transformed. The dead were moving. The soldiers had been infected with a variant virus that was not the T virus exactly, but something in the same lineage. A weaponized biological agent that had been deployed deliberately into the Panamstan theater. The person who had deployed it was Defense Secretary Wilson. Wilson had been a commanding officer during the Panamstan Civil War, and he had been running a secret bioweapons development program with apparent ties to a pharmaceutical entity. The series implies Tricell was involved, based on the ending of Infinite Darkness, where Tricell personnel appear to be the ones collecting biological material from the aftermath, though the connection is never stated explicitly in dialogue. Whatever the corporate backing, he had used the Panamstan intervention as an experimental theater, infecting American soldiers with a biological agent to test its properties as a combat enhancement. The virus functioned as a kind of enhancement at first. The infection made subjects stronger, faster, more physically capable, at the cost of progressive mutation that would eventually render them non-human if the suppressants stopped. The suppressants that his organization provided were both the means of maintaining the soldiers' usefulness and the mechanism of control. Stop supplying the suppressants and the infected soldiers turned. Wilson had infected Jason's entire unit. He had bombed the village in Penamstan, where the outbreak had occurred, to eliminate the evidence, killing everyone inside. The mad dogs had survived by becoming his assets, and one by one, in the years since, they had killed themselves rather than continue living as his instruments. Only Jason remained. He and a Chinese-American federal operative named Shen Mei, whose brother Jun Shi had been among the soldiers infected, had spent 6 years building a case against Wilson. They had uncovered a chip implanted in Shen Mei's brother's body that carried biometric data identifying the pharmaceutical organization behind the virus. The chip was the evidence. The night the White House was hit, Leon was not yet aware of any of this. The attack followed the cyber attack. Zombies moved through the White House complex, infecting staff, killing security personnel. Leon, Jason, and their team contained it in the building's lower levels. It was bizarre even by Leon's standards. A former art museum had been the worst place he had worked, but at least it had been advertised as a disaster. No one had called in advance to warn the White House that it was going to have a zombie problem on a Tuesday night. President Graham authorized a covert operation in response to the apparent evidence that China was behind the biological attack. Leon was dispatched to Shanghai on a submarine alongside Jason and Shen Mei. The submarine crossing was its own ordeal. Mutated rats had infiltrated the vessel, killing most of the crew before Leon sealed them behind a hatch and forced his way to the auxiliary departure unit. The ASDS escaped the submarine as the vessel self-destructed, and Leon discovered, in the chaos of that survival, that Jason and Shen Mei had been on their own agenda the entire time. In Shanghai, Jason told Leon the truth. He laid out Wilson's program, Penamstan, the chip, the evidence. He offered Leon the chance to cooperate, not to betray his country, but to expose a man within his country's government who had been running a bioweapons program that made everything Leon had ever fought against look modest in scale. Jason was infected. He had been infected since Penamstan, living on suppressants for 6 years, and the edge of mutation was always visible beneath his surface when he was under strain. He had kept his cognitive function intact through sheer discipline and the refusal to allow himself the peace of giving in. Leon heard him out. He understood the case being made. He was also acutely aware that Jason's plan did not end with a diplomatic briefing to the proper oversight committee. Jason's plan ended with him ceasing the suppressants and transforming into a tyrant-class creature, using his mutated body to physically demonstrate to the world what Wilson's program had created. The evidence would be spectacular and literal and undeniable. It would also require Jason to die as something barely human, broadcasting the horror of what had been done to him in a way that left his body as the proof. Claire had arrived in the region through TerraSave's work in Penamstan. She had been investigating a child refugee's drawing, an image that depicted zombies in ways that a child in Penamstan should have had no reason to produce, a visual record of what had happened in the village Wilson had bombed. Her parallel investigation had led her directly into Wilson's path. He had her captured and brought to his facility, a massive underground installation where hundreds of infected soldiers were being held in stasis, maintained as a standing army that could be deployed in the service of the war he was engineering between the United States and China. Leon reached Claire. Shen Mei's brother Jun Shi was in the facility. and the confrontation that followed involved all of them: Leon, Claire, Jason, Shen Mei, Wilson's soldiers, and eventually Wilson himself. Jason bit Wilson in the facility's final moments, infecting him with the same virus that had been used on the Penamston soldiers. Based on the progression of that virus without suppressants, Wilson's fate is not difficult to reason out, though the series does not linger on his end as explicitly as it does on Jason's transformation. Jason transformed. The tyrant that emerged from what had been a decorated American soldier was coherent in a way that tyrants are not usually coherent. He retained his identity, his anger, his ability to articulate what had been done to him and what he intended to do about it. Leon killed him. This was not a clean moment. It was the end of a man who had been failed comprehensively by the system that had sent him to Penamstan, who had survived 6 years in a state of ongoing physical horror because he believed that the truth about what had happened deserved to be seen. Leon killed him because the method Jason had chosen to reveal that truth would have caused catastrophic harm to people who had no part in Wilson's decisions. The evidence remained. Shen Mei had given the chip to Claire. Claire asked Leon to take it and make it public. He refused. He was a government agent with direct obligations to the executive branch, and what was on that chip would destabilize the Department of Defense at a moment when the world could not easily absorb that kind of exposure. He was not telling her the truth was worthless. He was telling her the time was not right. Claire was furious. The gap between what she knew and what she could prove, between what Leon would do and what she believed needed to be done, opened between them in a way that would take time to close. Leon left China carrying the weight of what he had not done. Wilson was dead, infected by Jason's final act. The program was disrupted. The war had been prevented. The full truth was buried in classification, where it would join everything else that the post-Raccoon City era had produced that the government could not afford to acknowledge. Tricell continued to exist, continued to operate, continued to acquire the biological legacy of defunct organizations. Leon filed his report and went back to work. Eastern Europe, 2011. The years between 2006 and 2011 were defined by operations that have not all been documented in detail, by the accumulation of experience that changes a person's relationship to their own mortality, and by the founding of a new organization. President Adam Benford, who had ascended through the government's ranks to the executive branch and eventually to the presidency itself, made one of his first acts as president the establishment of the Division of Security Operations. The DSO was a counter-bioterrorism agency under direct presidential oversight, replacing the Anti-Umbrella Pursuit and Investigation Team that had been Leon's institutional home since 1998. Leon was a founding member. His role formalized what had always been true about the nature of his service. He was the government's best option for biological crisis situations, and that fact now had a cleaner organizational structure around it. The Eastern Slav Republic was a country in the middle of a civil war. Both sides, the government and the rebel forces, appeared to be using bioorganic weapons, and the United States had intelligence suggesting that whatever was enabling this escalation had connections to the Illuminados' incident's aftermath. The Plagas parasite had not simply disappeared when Sadler died. Its data, its biological specimens, and the research around it had dispersed through the same network of black market transactions and remnant programs that kept every bioweapon strain in circulation long after its creators were gone. Leon was pulled from vacation and sent in to link up with a CIA asset named Scarecrow. who had information on the source of the Plaga's weapons being used in the conflict. He arrived in the capital city of Holograd in the middle of a war. Shortly after arriving, the US government issued an order to withdraw. Leon's orders changed before he had made any meaningful contact. He was supposed to leave. He did not leave. This was not the first time Leon had ignored an order to withdraw and continued operating on his own assessment of what the situation required. The DSO's founding philosophy included a degree of agent autonomy, precisely because the situations these agents were dispatched to handle rarely behaved according to the assumptions that generated the initial orders. Leon understood this implicitly, and he understood it in the way that a person understands something when it costs them something to act on it, rather than simply when it is convenient. In an underground parking structure, he found Scarecrow. The agent had been badly wounded. He managed to say one word before a licker, a biological weapon derived from T-virus research, a creature that navigated by sound and killed with extreme efficiency, ended him. Beekeeper. The word was a fragment of intelligence about the network supplying the bioweapons to the conflict. Leon filed it and ran. He moved through Holograd under fire, dodging both government and rebel forces while trying to locate the Plaga's supply chain and neutralize whatever was maintaining it. The city in the middle of a civil war had a particular character that differed from the zombie outbreaks he had become expert at navigating. In a zombie outbreak, everyone who was not visibly infected was a potential ally. In a civil war, everyone carried a side, and neither side was interested in the American agent moving through their streets asking questions about biological weapon suppliers. Leon dealt with this through the combination of tactical, evasion, and, when necessary, direct confrontation that had become his primary operating mode across a decade of dangerous assignments. He encountered Ada Wong in a marketplace. This was their third meeting in an active operational theater, Raccoon City, Spain, now Eastern Europe. And the meeting had the quality of a recurring motif that neither of them had written. She was there on her own mission, as always. She had not introduced the Plagas, she noted with dry precision, finding the suggestion that she would bother with defective products somewhat amusing. She flirted with him briefly, referred to a night whose specifics were left deliberately obscure, and then warned him that the town was about to be purged and departed in the direction of her own objectives. Their exchange in that marketplace had the efficiency of two people who have been through enough together that the baseline of mutual knowledge does not require re-establishment every time they meet. They argued without preamble, communicated information through implication rather than explanation, and separated without closure in the way they always separate. Not resolved, not broken, simply suspended. Ada's appearance in his operations has a quality of inevitability to it that Leon has long since stopped trying to rationalize. She appears where something important is happening. Whether she is the cause or the consequence, or simply attracted to consequence the way he is, remains genuinely unclear. The political architecture of the Eastern Slav Republic's conflict was being managed by the country's president, Svetlana Belikova, who had been using bio-organic weapons as tools of suppression against rebel populations and was now facing the possibility of external exposure. When Leon came closer to the truth of who was orchestrating the Plaga's deployment, he found himself in a standoff with a president who had access to the full machinery of state violence and who was quite prepared to use it to contain the investigation. Leon was arrested. He argued his case with a combination of the facts he had assembled and the particular tenacity of someone who has never successfully stayed contained. when they believed that containment was wrong. He was eventually allowed to leave. The Eastern Slav Republic story ended not in a clean resolution, but in a negotiated mess. The kind of outcome that political situations tend to produce when no one faction has sufficient moral authority to claim a definitive victory. Leon departed the country with intelligence about the Plaga's network that would inform future operations, and with a detailed report on the role of the sitting president in biological warfare against her own population. He submitted the report. What happened to it within the bureaucracy was, as with most such reports, its own separate question. The president he had to shoot, 2013. 15 years after Raccoon City, Leon Kennedy was standing in a university lecture hall in Tall Oaks, a city in the American heartland, as part of the protective detail for President Adam Benford. The man who had recruited Leon out of the ruins of a dying city had become the most powerful person in the United States, and he had decided to do something that no president in the history of the post-Raccoon City era had been willing to do. He was going to tell the truth about what the government had done. Benford's speech at Ivy University was planned as a public disclosure of the United States government's role in the Raccoon City incident. The collaboration with Umbrella, the funding of bioweapons research in direct violation of international treaties, the decision to bomb the city to eliminate the evidence rather than to protect the population, all of it. Benford had decided that the long-term credibility of American institutions required this disclosure, that the cancer of the covered truth was doing more damage over time than the shock of public revelation would. This was a controversial position within the administration, and there were people in powerful positions who found it threatening enough to take action against it. Benford never gave the speech. A Lopodica, a type of infected biological weapon that spread C virus through the fog it exhaled, had been introduced into the university's ventilation system hours before the event. The creature moved through Ivy University's hallways as the audience was assembling, and the fog it released turned everyone it touched. The President of the United States succumbed to the infection before Leon reached his location. By the time Leon and Helena Harper, a Secret Service agent who had been assigned to Benford's detail, found him, President Adam Benford was no longer President Adam Benford. He was a zombie, and he was advancing on Helena with the particular absence of recognition that defines what the T virus and its derivatives do to people. Leon shot him. This is the moment that almost every account of Leon Kennedy's life eventually reaches and pauses at. Not because the tactical decision was complex, it was not. An infected person advancing on a living person is a threat that resolves in a specific way, and Leon had spent 15 years resolving threats of this kind. The complexity was entirely personal. Benford had recruited him. Benford had been his friend in the limited way that a person with his kind of life maintains friendships. Benford had been the one who gave Leon a purpose beyond survival after Raccoon City, who had believed the truth about what the government had done was worth fighting against rather than worth protecting. Benford had been, in a real sense, the reason Leon's specific life existed in the form it took, and Leon had just killed him. Aimed at his friend, at the person most responsible for the shape of his adult existence, and fired. There is a particular cruelty in the details of this moment that exceeds ordinary tragedy. Benford was trying to go public with the Raccoon City truth. He had decided that the long-suppressed knowledge of the government's role in the disaster, the same knowledge that had been used to coerce Leon into service 15 years earlier, needed to finally be given to the American public. His speech at Ivy University was meant to be the corrective act, the acknowledgement that would allow the wound to begin to close. He never gave it. He was killed before he could speak the words he had been building toward for over a decade. The cover-up that had defined both their lives swallowed its most committed opponent before he could end it. And the agent who had been his closest ally in the fight against bioterrorism pulled the trigger that finished him. Leon has never, in any documented account or public statement, spoken directly about what this cost him. The operational summary filed after Tall Oaks is clinical in the way that operational summaries are required to be, but the record of his choices in the hours and days that followed, the relentlessness with which he pursued Simmons, the specific language he used when finally confronting the man responsible, the way he defended Helena Harper against arrest, even though her participation in the assassination had been real, suggests that something in the machinery of how Leon Kennedy absorbs loss and converts it into forward motion was operating at a particular intensity in the aftermath of Benford's death. Helena Harper said, in the immediate aftermath, that it was her fault. She would explain later, in the catacombs beneath the Tall Oaks Cathedral, after leading Leon to the evidence she had been carrying, that she had been coerced by the National Security Advisor, Derek Simmons, into creating the gap in Benford's protection that allowed the Lepotica to reach him. Simmons had abducted her younger sister Deborah and used that leverage to force Helena's participation in the assassination. Helena had tried to warn the Secret Service through anonymous channels and had not been believed, her record of infractions within the agency used to discredit her when it mattered most. Simmons was the villain of the Tall Oaks attack, and he was the villain in the same way that the attacks on Raccoon City had been villainous, through institutional complicity, through the use of government authority as a shield against accountability. He was the National Security Advisor. He had the power to frame Leon and Helena as the assassins of the president they had watched die. He had the power to request missile strikes on contaminated urban areas, and he used it on Tall Oaks the way it had been used on Raccoon City 15 years earlier. Not to protect the living, but to burn the evidence. Leon and Helena escaped into the catacombs beneath the cathedral as Tall Oaks burned above them. In the underground laboratory that Helena's knowledge of the area led them to, they found the infrastructure of the attack, cocoon-like biological constructs, C-virus research, and a recording that appeared to show Ada Wong emerging from a chrysalis. Leon processed this with the careful logic of someone who has seen too much to accept the obvious interpretation of a convenient recording. Ada Wong in a cocoon was either genuine and required explanation, or it was manufactured and required a different explanation. Helena's sister Deborah was in the catacombs. The reunion lasted seconds before Deborah's C-virus infection began its final transformation. The chrysalis process, a feature of the C-virus that the T-virus did not share, involved the host forming a cocoon around themselves before emerging in a radically altered state. As Deborah's transformation progressed, Ada Wong appeared in the catacombs and fired a crossbow bolt into her, an act that read simultaneously as tactical intervention and something colder. The transformation was not reversed. Deborah emerged from her cocoon in a monstrous altered form regardless, and Helena was eventually forced to let her fall into the darkness below the broken walkway, unable to save someone who was already gone in every sense that mattered. The sequence left the moral calculus of Ada's involvement unresolved. Whether her crossbow shot was mercy, efficiency, or something else was a question none of them had time to press in that moment. Helena confessed, after Deborah's death, to her role in Benford's assassination. She had done it under duress. She was not innocent of the mechanics, but she was not the origin of the plan. Leon heard this, and extended to her the grace of making the distinction between participation under coercion and autonomous malice, the same grace that he had extended to himself in some sense when he thought about his own choices in Raccoon City. He could have held her responsible. He chose instead to focus on the person who was actually responsible. That person was going to China. Simmons had been standing next to Hunnigan when Leon tried to warn her about him, listening to the entire conversation. He had used his position to name Leon and Helena as the primary suspects in the president's assassination, exploiting the fact that they had been the last people with the president before his infection. He was using the same institutional authority that made him powerful to make himself untouchable, framing the accusation before the accused could frame him. Leon asked Hunnigan to fake their deaths. She did. He and Helena boarded a plane under false identities bound for the People's Republic of China, where the available intelligence suggested Simmons and whatever remained of the C-virus operation were converging. The plane did not complete the flight in a conventional sense. A Lopotica in the cargo hold ensured that the last hour of the journey was not airborne. Leon and Helena fought through a zombified aircraft over the Chinese coastline and walked away from a crash landing in the city of Lanxiang, which was itself already becoming a disaster site as the C-virus spread through the civilian population. Lanxiang was where everything converged. Leon and Helena were there. Chris Redfield and his BSAA partner Piers Nevens were there, operating on a separate track of the same crisis, hunting what they believed was Ada Wong, who they held responsible for the deaths of Chris's unit 6 months earlier. Jake Muller, the son of Albert Wesker, who was carrying antibodies against the C-virus in his blood, was there with Sherry Birkin. The Sherry that Leon had carried out of Raccoon City 15 years ago as a 12-year-old child was now a DSO agent in her own right, escorting Jake as a protected asset whose blood might be the basis for a vaccine. Leon and Chris drew guns on each other in a burning building. The confrontation was brief and tense in the way that two people with overlapping but incomplete pictures of the same situation tend to be when one of them thinks the other is protecting someone guilty. Chris had been told that Ada Wong was responsible for the deaths of his team. Leon knew that the Ada Wong operating in Lanxiang was not the real Ada Wong, that the recordings in the catacombs had been Ada's clone, a scientist named Carla Radames, who had been transformed into a copy of Ada by Simmons as part of a personal obsession. Chris was pursuing someone who looked and sounded like Ada, but was not her. Leon tried to explain this. Chris was not immediately receptive. They separated without shooting each other. This was a better outcome than it might have been. Simmons died in Lanxiang. His infection with the enhanced C-virus, which Leon and Helena had forced on him in their first confrontation in the city, produced transformations that cycled through multiple forms. Canine, insectoid, something that defied easy categorization, all of them enormous, and all of them still containing the voice of a man, trying to justify his actions, even as his body disassembled itself in service of the virus's ambitions. Leon and Helena killed him across multiple encounters that ranged from the city streets to its harbor to its crumbling infrastructure. Ada Wong, the real one, in red rather than Carla's blue, assisted in the final confrontation, providing equipment and covering fire and one final departure that was beginning to feel like a ritual between them. She left evidence behind this time, digital files proving Simmons's responsibility for Tall Oaks. Leon recovered them. He and Helena were cleared of the assassination charges they had been carrying. Helena visited her sister's grave Hunnigan handed her back her gun, rather than arresting her, which was how Leon chose to close that account. Benford would have wanted it that way. Leon said as much. The C virus attacks were over, but the headline underneath the headline was not. Neo Umbrella, the organization that had been financing the bioterror campaign, had been a creation of Carla Radames, who had been Simmons's weapon, and had then turned herself into her own weapon against him. The organization was dismantled. Its research was confiscated or destroyed. A C virus missile detonated over Lanxiang before it could be stopped, infecting much of the city. The long aftermath of clearing and treating what the missile had done was not Leon's operational responsibility, but the moral weight of another city's ruination settled over him regardless. Somewhere between Tall Oaks and Lanxiang, something had changed in Leon that was not simply the accumulation of additional experience. He had killed a president. He had killed his friend. He had done it correctly, in the way that it had to be done, and the correctness of it did not reduce the weight. He carried it the way he carried Raccoon City, not as a wound that incapacitated him, but as a fact about the world that he had made his terms with, and that would never fully dissolve. San Francisco and Alcatraz, 2015. 2 years after the death of Simmons, Leon was assigned to locate and apprehend a man named Dr. Antonio Taylor. Taylor was a DARPA researcher, a robotics engineer who had sold classified information to foreign entities and subsequently been kidnapped, presumably by the people he had sold to or by others who wanted what he had. Leon was pursuing Taylor through San Francisco when a woman intercepted the chase. The interception was not accidental. The woman was Maria Gomez, who would be identified later as a figure connected to the events of the Vendetta incident in New York. She had survived the chaos of that particular crisis and had subsequently aligned herself with someone who had plans for Taylor and for the city. San Francisco was simultaneously host to a separate investigation. Chris Redfield and his BSAA team were tracking a zombie outbreak in the city that defied the usual biological explanations. The victims shared only one point of contact. They had all visited Alcatraz Island before dying. The former federal prison, which had long since transitioned into a tourist attraction, had become a staging ground for someone with both the technical capability to operate there and a reason to weaponize a T-virus variant through mosquito-like drones designed to infect specific targets. The convergence of Leon's pursuit and Chris's investigation was not coincidental by the time it resolved on the island. Claire Redfield had separately been tracking a contaminated orca near the marine sanctuary, an indicator that the biological release was not contained to the city. Rebecca Chambers, a BSAA bioterrorism researcher who had been part of the original STARS team from the Spencer Mansion incident, had connected the biological data from the city victims to the Alcatraz location and had mobilized toward it. Leon arrived at Alcatraz through the sewage infrastructure of the island's tourist complex. In the tunnels, he encountered Jill Valentine, which was the kind of meeting that, under different circumstances, might have been remarkable, but which in the actual circumstances was simply another instance of the Resident Evil universe's senior field agents arriving at the same location from different vectors. Jill was conducting her own investigation into the outbreak's source, and the two of them spent the first several seconds after recognizing each other fighting, because neither had immediately identified the other as not a threat. They adjusted quickly. The tunnels were full of lickers, a new amphibian variant that navigated differently than the breed Leon had encountered before. He and Jill moved through the tunnel system together in something that was partly coordinated and partly improvised, and they found their way to an armory that contained the blueprints for the drone system being used to spread the infection. The man behind the Alcatraz operation was named Dylan Blake. His grievance stretched back to 1998, to the night Raccoon City fell. He had been a member of Unit 6, a private military unit contracted by Umbrella Corporation to help evacuate high-ranking executives and government officials as the city descended into chaos. The evacuation had a hierarchy built into it. The powerful were moved first, and the soldiers doing the moving were expendable. When the members of Unit 6 began to be bitten and infected during the operation, headquarters did not send medical assistance. They sent a quarantine order, and then an elimination order. The soldiers were told to kill their infected comrades rather than extract them. Dylan had watched his friend JJ get bitten. He had been the one who pulled the trigger, because there was no other option, and because headquarters had made clear that options were not something they intended to provide. He had survived. His contempt for the institutions that had used him and discarded his teammates had spent 17 years accumulating into something organized and patient. His statement was, "Everyone complicit in the ongoing lie deserves to experience what he experienced." He infected Leon, Chris, and Claire with his T-virus variant using the drones. He left Jill uninfected specifically so she could watch her colleagues turn, mirroring the experience of watching the people you are supposed to protect become something terrible. He had created a villain who had built his entire philosophy on a real injustice and arrived at methods that were indistinguishable from the cruelty he believed himself to be opposing. Rebecca had arrived on the island with a vaccine. Leon, Chris, and Claire, infected and aware of what was coming, did not stop working. This is the quality that the series has always attributed to these characters in their best moments, the refusal to yield to the countdown on their own survival. They fought Dylan and Maria through the prison's deteriorating structure. Rebecca's vaccines reversed the infections. Dylan died. The bittersweet note was honest. The tourist group that had been on Alcatraz when Dylan's drones activated had not been saved. They had been infected and killed before anyone arrived to intervene. The scale of the attack had been contained. Dylan's ambition of a worldwide release had been stopped. But the people who had simply visited a famous landmark on an ordinary afternoon were gone. Leon noted, departing the island with the others, that more bad actors with worse tools were going to keep coming. He did not say this as defeat. He said it as information. What remains? The decades that separate the boy who showed up hungover and late to his first day as a police officer from the man who has fought bioterrorism on 3 continents and in at least 2 countries that do not officially exist, are visible in him. Not loudly. Leon Kennedy has never performed his damage or his accomplishments. The dry humor that made him recognizable as a person in the corridors of the Raccoon City Police Department is still there, moderated now by the weight of everything it has had to work against. He quips because the alternative is silence, and silence in those situations is where the full weight of what is happening gets to land without interference. He has killed people he respected. He killed Adam Benford because there was no other choice, and he has never pretended it was easy. He killed Jack Krauser because the path Krauser chose had to be closed, and because the argument Krauser made that the system had failed them both was not wrong enough to justify refusing to close it. He has participated in operations that the government has never acknowledged, survived situations that have not been entered into any public record, and made compromises between what he believed was right and what the operational reality permitted that have not always resolved cleanly. The relationship with Ada Wong has been one of the defining threads of his adult life, and it has been defined by incompleteness. She has saved him. He has saved her. Between the two of them, they have pulled each other back from the edge of death in Raccoon City, in Spain, in China, across multiple crisis zones, and neither of them has ever fully closed the conversation that the sewers of Raccoon City opened in 1998. She operates in a space that his obligations cannot reach. He exists in a world of accountability and institutional loyalty that her operational freedom does not require. Each time their paths intersect, the emotional current is real, and the structural incompatibility is also real. He told her, on a boat off the coast of Spain, that she was a part of him he could not let go. She has never offered him a comparable transparency, and this asymmetry is part of what makes the relationship what it is, real and impossible simultaneously. Ada Wong remains unknown in ways that remain deliberately unresolved. Her employers have changed. Her objectives have shifted. She has operated for Wesker and against him. She has taken things from Leon that compromised his missions and given him things that saved his life. The compact she left behind in Lanxiang, handed eventually back to Leon through Helena, is a small object that carries a disproportionate weight in the story of his life. A piece of a woman who has never fully arrived and never fully departed. Whether this is what he wants or simply what he has are questions he has answered at different times in different ways, and the answer that persists is probably that he stopped trying to separate them. He and Claire Redfield have maintained a friendship across all the years and all the diverging paths. She went into advocacy and he went into classified service, and those choices put them on opposite sides of specific questions, whether to release certain evidence, whether government transparency should be timed by institutional readiness or moral urgency. But the connection from Raccoon City endures because it was forged in the kind of night that does not leave people unless they choose to leave it. Sherry Birkin became a DSO agent. The child he carried out of Raccoon City grew up in government supervision. Her G virus infection managed and studied. Her future shaped by the same institutional forces that had shaped Leon's. By 2013, she was his colleague. By the time of the Lanxiang crisis, she was capable enough to operate in a combat zone and handle a protected witness of enormous value. Leon looked at her in China and understood what that completion meant. That Raccoon City had not simply produced casualties, it had also produced this. The Division of Security Operations continued to evolve. Leon's role within it was not administrative. He remained operational, remained in the field, remained the agent who was called when the situation exceeded standard parameters. This was not entirely by institutional design. It was partly by personal choice. He is uncomfortable with the idea of a life in which someone else goes into the difficult spaces and he manages it from a distance. Whatever Raccoon City made of him, it made someone who needs to be where the thing is actually happening, not where the reports about it arrive. By 2026, the ghosts of Raccoon City were not done with him. A series of biological deaths connected to survivors of the 1998 outbreak drew the attention of the DSO. The pattern was specific. People who had survived the original destruction incident were dying in ways that suggested a targeted biological program. Leon was sent to investigate, along with Sherry Birkin, in a case that would lead him to a former Umbrella researcher named Victor Gideon, to a disease called the Raccoon City Syndrome, and to a substance called Elpis. He also met an FBI technical analyst named Grace Ashcroft, to whom he gave his DSO-issued custom revolver, the Requiem, for protection during the chaos of their encounter. The name of the weapon has a particular resonance in the context of his life's work. A requiem is music for the dead. The weapon name for it has been used across his career to protect the living. The government forces that were supposed to enable his investigation shut it down. A high-ranking member of the network behind the Raccoon City syndrome, someone with connections deep enough inside the government to kill an active DSO investigation, issued the order to stand down. Leon and Sherry went rogue. This was not the first time Leon had ignored a government order to withdraw, because the thing that needed to be done was still happening, and the withdrawal would have left it undone. It may not be the last. He has a ring on his left hand in this period. The game does not explain it outright. This is not a detail the official materials have spelled out in dialogue or files. The director of his most recent mission, when asked about it in promotional materials, described it in terms of a place for Leon to return to. A home, a person waiting, something that does not belong to the operational record. Whether this implies marriage, a committed relationship, or something else the creators haven't fully disclosed, is left open by design. What the ring seems to imply, based on the framing around it, is that somewhere in the years between the disasters, Leon found someone worth coming back to. This is perhaps the thing that the complete picture of Leon Kennedy's life most clearly demonstrates, that the transformation from a hungover rookie who drove into a dying city on what was supposed to be his first day at work into one of the most experienced anti-bioterrorism operatives in the world was not a loss of self, despite how many selves it might have seemed to pass through. The belief in doing what is right, even when the institution he serves tells him otherwise. The refusal to leave people behind even when the orders permit it. The care for individuals in the middle of catastrophes that are consuming thousands. The woman in the basement of the police station. The little girl in the Nest lab. The president's daughter in a Spanish church. The partner who lost her sister in the catacombs. He has saved people who did not survive. He has saved people who did. He has carried both forward because the alternative was to become something that the night in Raccoon City was trying to make of everyone it touched. He did not let it. The story is not over. Somewhere in the quiet years between the disasters, Leon Kennedy drives somewhere and turns off the engine, and for a moment, there is nothing happening that requires him to be capable of anything. The ring catches the light. The radio plays something from before the world started going wrong, and he sits there in that ordinary silence, which is the rarest thing a person in his position ever finds, and holds it for however long it lasts before the next call comes.